Education is a passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. At a time, the Education Minister of Sri Lanka is pushing for tabs for A-level students. Have we got our priorities right? At a time, the undergraduates in this nation are on the streets and not at universities. At a time, doctors who studied with you and my money are fighting for their rights, putting the innocent patients at risk. At a time, there are over 93 members in our current parliament who have not even qualified the ordinary level examination. Where is Sri Lanka's education sector really heading? Our topic of discussion today, in one word, is education. Let me quickly introduce our guests to you this evening. Joining us this evening are Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia and former Director General, Tertiary and Vocational Commission, Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Gamage. Also joining us this evening is Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman, University Grants Commission of Sri Lanka. We'll be also joined by Ramal Jasinghe, representing the private sector. He is the President of the National Chamber of Exporters. Let's start off tonight's show with Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the University Grants Commission, Sri Lanka. Professor, you've been in this job since 2015. What are the challenges that you have encountered as the Chairman of the University Grants Commission of Sri Lanka?
Well, thank you very much for giving this opportunity. To be very specific, changing a system which has been there for a very long time is a challenge. And when you try to be a change agent, it's going to be more and more difficult. So that's the challenge. As I see it in higher education, I could say that we have three main areas which we have to address to satisfy what the public wants and what Sri Lanka wants. First, to address the crying issue of the skills mismatch. And that is a problem which is not uncommon in Asian subcontinent, but Sri Lanka is a unique case study because of our free higher education, universal free higher education system which Sri Lankans have been enjoying for a long time, which has become a very specific issue in itself, which has made the problem very unique. So the skills mismatch was one. And the second one is to develop a safe and conducive environment in Sri Lankan state university system for studies for the students who enter the university system after a major battle. It's actually a life and death type of exam where either you enter or you don't, and there is a massive competition. So whether these students are coming into a safe and conducive environment for higher studies is a question which you, in your introduction, was talking about students walking in the streets rather than in the universities. So obviously there is the second challenge. Third one is the quality of what we do in the state university system, what is called the quality assurance. So this gets a little bit more complicated when you look at the non-state higher education sector in Sri Lanka. Because of the free state-sponsored higher education for nearly 70 years now, there is no parallel development of non-state higher education system in line with the state higher education system. So there is issue about the quality there as well. And University Grants Commission, together with the Minister of Higher Education, led by the Honourable Minister of Higher Education, is got several proactive steps within last 2 years or 2.5 years, which I would like to elaborate with statistics as the time goes by.
Professor, time and time again, we've heard from respective governments about changing Sri Lanka's education sector. We only saw some sort of concrete action being taken during Minister Richard Patrina's time when he was the Minister of Education. But since then, we've never seen some concrete action being taken by any of the ministers who have been in power. What is the reason behind this?
Well, higher education is a real challenge. It is politically a very sensitive area as well, because universal free higher education has become a sacred or holy grail in the mind of Sri Lankan masses, and it is a challenge to change life, decades old system. I think if you compare with the Honorable Richard Patrina's time and now, I think one of the key things which he introduced at the time is the University Ragging Act of 1998, which was not only introduced, he used it, but recently with all the issues which UGC have been facing with the environment in state universities, I think time has come for that, and Honorable Minister, the present Minister of Higher Education, Honorable Dr. Vijay Rajapaksa, has taken a lot of proactive steps, and recently we have seen the results as well. So that is one aspect of creating safe and conducive environment. But there are a lot of other things to talk about as compared with what you saw in Honorable Richard Patrina's time and today. And I think there are a lot of other developments which you probably...
Professor, take into account the way in which there is so much of cabinet reshuffles at present. Do you think even the present Minister of Higher Education can instill some change in the next 2 years or so, or less than 2 years?
I think for us leadership is vital. And at the moment, during last few months, there have been a lot of changes that has come. We have become quite vocal with it, and I think there is a will, there is a way, and I'm sure there is.
So you're optimistic. You're optimistic that the change that you were not able to do for the last 3 years, you can do it in the next 2 years or less than that time.
Percentage success is what we are looking for.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the University Grants Commission. I now move my attention to Dr. Sujata Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia and former Director General, Tertiary and Vocational Commission of Sri Lanka. Dr. Gamage, is there a problem with Sri Lanka's education system? The time starts now.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the skills mismatch issue. Let's take the higher education part. I mean, we hear this so much. World Bank has been, that's their mainstay when it comes to funding, skills mismatch. But I think that we don't address a key issue here, that the matchmaker, the government is trying to be the matchmaker. The government decides how to open a technology stream, to reduce the art stream. That's fine. The government has to make some decision, but there's absolute no market signals. There has to be some market signals. That doesn't mean you can have market signals in a public university system. Take Canada. There are no private universities. Most public. Even UK. Even the United States. I know detail about the state of Ohio. Most of the universities are public universities. So what happens is, what we forget is that actually there's some tuition payment for students, and most students are on student support. They are on scholarships, they are on loans, but there's some market signal. So if the art students are not getting employed, if the technology stream if you don't think you're going to get employment, there's some market, because the students have some commitment. They have to put in some money. Then it need not be tuition. It can be like in Australia, you can have a full loan, grants and loan system which comes into play. They have to pay only after they graduate. But the students have to put something into the system so that they have some responsibility. So right now what we have is a totally supply driven system, and the matchmaker is the government and the UGC.
You speak about mismatch, Dr.
So the mismatch
Gamage
is really caused by central planning. But there are no market signals for the students as they enroll. People just enroll because there are spots in the university. Who decides how many spots?
Is it a pity, Dr. Gamage, that the government has to provide free education to students from grade 1 to 13, and then comes the university system, which is also free of charge for these students, and then the government itself has to provide employment and a livelihood for these students as well? Isn't this a pity? Isn't this a mismatch itself?
I think, but this is a developing country. I think tertiary education, there has to be support for students, but I think there should be some payback by students. At least we should begin with the medical students. With each professional degrees we give for free. That's fine, you give it free, but there should be some payback. For example, take medicine. You get people you give them free education, but they are their debt, their responsibility accumulates, and at the end of their education, if they serve the country, if they serve rural areas, they can pay off the loan. Otherwise, they have to pay. If they leave the country, they can pay. We don't have absolutely no responsibility, absolutely no accountability for the student side. So there has to be some accountability. We can match actually have free education. They can have education free while they're students, but there has to be some payback.
It all sounds well and good, Dr. Gamage, but how practical is it? You have a GMOA which strikes for every little thing that happens in the country and putting the innocent patients at risk. And then you're saying about something that is extremely far-fetched at present, which is something like elusive.
Definitely not in the next 2 years with the election coming up. But I think we need to see some strong leadership, and there has to be some accountability by the universities. Right now, that accountability has to come in. I think, as you said, it's not practical to think about. At this stage, in the next 1.5 years, nothing's going to happen in this area. But I think this has to come about. Otherwise, forever we'll be talking about skills mismatch, because it's centrally controlled, central government, the UGC, whoever decides how many art slots to offer, how many technology, and all free of charge. And there's no signal for the students to, when who are coming in, which stream they should choose.
Dr. Gamage, very quickly before I move to Ramal, how good is the idea of providing tabs for students at a time Sri Lanka's education system as a whole needs to have a complete change? How important are tabs for the students?
I think this is, when you say tabs, it's very easy to say it's tabs, but actually we are talking about digital literacy for students. I think it's very important, and I think it should have been, actually this was promised by the government in the manifesto in 2015. I don't know why it took so long. They should have done a pilot. The pilot was never done. So I think it's important that for advanced level students, those going to 12 and 13, we give them some digital literacy and the ability to get that. You need some, maybe students need devices, but that's something we should have tested. We should have done the pilot right away.
You're saying a haphazard manner in which they're trying to bring this is not the way forward? I think we can do it probably without giving tabs to individual students, but we need to try it out. But I think it is a good idea. It needs to be tested. And right now, there seems to be a hurry to get it done, but I think, no, there should be a pilot. Thank you very much, Dr. Sujata Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia. I now move my attention to the very vocal Ramal Jasingh, President of the National Chamber of Exporters, also representing somewhat the private sector of the country as well. Ramal, skills mismatch. My question to you is going to be quite blunt. My question is going to be, in the event there is a student who has graduated from a foreign university, comes to you for a job interview, and you get another student from a rural village in Sri Lanka who comes for a job interview, who would you give preference to right at the outset? You see the CVs, you speak to these individuals, and then you have to make a call, and you can only take one person to the job. Who would you choose?
Understood, and I'm going to sound very controversial. If it's a blunt answer to a blunt question, probably I might, let me put it this way, let me be less blunt, right, where I will give a fair chance, but again at the end of the day I am representing my company and its bottom line, and how far the company could take. Of course, by some coincidence, I've just returned from a lecture. I do lecture in the university system, and I think there's one gesture on the part of the system to extend its hand to the private sector professionals to get onto their faculties, onto their visiting faculties. So I just completed a lecture at the PIM, Postgraduate Institute of Marketing, of Management. So having a very intense flavor for the university graduate of Sri Lanka. I've been lecturing for almost 20 years now as a visiting lecturer, started from Sri Jawaharlal. The difference is the finished product. Now our university system has a very well-rounded curriculum. I've been teaching in business management and in marketing. But what I used to teach them in my courses was a slight deviation from the course design, and I had to teach them the skills of presentation. Now that is where the university graduate from abroad and the local village university graduate would show bifurcation. They would change. That's why it deviates. Because you would find the danger with a foreign university student, I think the professor and doctor might agree with me, the quality would vary. We don't know from where the degree has originated. If it's a Stanford, Harvard or Cambridge, Oxford or Imperial, something like that, then you know where it comes from. But today you get universities upon universities, and there are some local institutions that are also representing such universities. So it depends on how well rounded the person would be on the job. But if it's somebody I need to place in front of another executive or on a B2B discussion, I would definitely go for the foreign graduate, because he would have the finesse or the finishing touches that I would need.
Ramal, whose fault is it? It's definitely not the fault of the student.
Definitely not.
Who is at fault?
Well,
or what is the problem?
I would run the risk of going into a very controversial area of the time a little before I was born, when the single-only curriculum came in. But probably that was the call of the time. And the world has changed since then. And one could argue that in countries like China or Russia, you would need to know your national language to get anywhere. I think the professor would agree with me. So there was a call for developing Sinhala at that time. But again, we are an island, and Sinhala is spoken only by 22 million people. So with the world changing, I wouldn't know how those policies withstand today. But nonetheless, there's every opportunity today with technology for the village person also, or the village graduate, to get the advantage of the advantages of technology that you have. Now, I am reading off the Vision 2020. That's the so-called, that's the government plan for the next 2025 rather, for the next 5 years or 5 to 6 years, where it says that literacy in terms of IT is only 27.5%. But we have, ironically, more than 100% penetration of digital of phones, of mobile phones and smartphones. I think we have something like probably closer to 5 million youth using smartphones and very active on Facebook and social media. So I'm sure, Saim, there has been some sort of a change, a shift. But whether it's fast enough or whether it can apply onto that first question you asked. Because at the end of the day, it is what my company requires and what the private sector requires. So whether you have the patience to hold hands with the local graduate and run the risk of losing business, or would you rather take somebody who will get into the system immediately, like a duck to water, and carry on with your business?
Rama, very quickly before I open the floor for questions from our journalists, you speak about the Sinhala Only Act in 1956, which was introduced by SWRD Bandaranaike. Isn't it a pity that all politicians in Sri Lanka over the last few decades have only thought about themselves? If you look at SWRD Bandaranaike's two children, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, as well as three children, Sunatra as well as late Andrew Bandaranaike, all of them studied overseas. All of them are graduates of well-reputed British universities. And here he is an individual who brings in the Sinhala-only curriculum to our system, and that is one of the reasons that has led to all these issues in Sri Lanka at present. Who do you blame? Who do you blame all this to? Who are you pointing the finger at?
Your comment or question actually reminds me of a long time ago in the 70s, in the peak of the 70s, when I had to go to my sister's school to witness her getting a prize. And at that time, the Minister of Education, the late Mrs. Siva Ubesekara, addressed the crowd, at least the audience there, and she said her dream, being the Minister of Education, was when politics stay away from education. So I think it remains a pipe dream even to this date, but I think that is the key.
Thank you very much, Ramal Jasingh, President of the National Chamber of Exporters, also representing the private sector somewhat in Sri Lanka today. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. Onto my immediate left is attorney at law Sonali Vanagabathuke, and onto my far left is Nabi Majid. Education. So let's start off with Sonali.
Thank you very much, Shamir. Professor, my first question is to you. Why does Sri Lanka have some of the oldest graduates when compared with the rest of the world? And the Department of Examinations as well as the UGC is oftentimes criticized for the delay in the time taken between the advanced level examination to university entrance. How do you explain this? We are in a digitized economy. Why is this delay still present?
Well, I think during last 2.5 years, we actually have taken some proactive steps to address this issue. This is a national problem. First thing we did was we actually made all the applications online. We had enormous criticism on this, but we did it. Within 3 weeks, we had 71,777 applications coming to the UGC within 3 weeks. Sri Lanka is a digitalized country. We get everything free. The kids could go to a next center and get this free. And we pay 150 rupees per application to the center. Students, they don't have to pay. So we made it digital application system, which made it easy for us to analyze. Number two, the registration. Entire registration was taken to the University Grants Commission. Now everything is done there. And entire registration process was made online. So that online application and online registration within last 2 years actually helped us to analyze more precisely and also to find certain weak points. Sometimes students by mistake or maybe rarely willfully can do wrongdoings, and when you have this type of thing gets flagged in the document, which makes it easy for us to analyze. So that was the first thing we did. And secondly, we analyze all the study programs in Sri Lankan state universities. I can tell you very precisely that entire Sri Lankan state university system has 210 study programs. We call it courses of studies. We don't call it degree programs, courses of studies, 210 in number. Now every study program or the course of study was given a unique identity called Unicode. So now we follow a Unicode system. So we made the system more a method which is sustainable for us to understand.
Okay.
Thirdly, what we did was, because there is no paper application quantum was very much less, it was easy. But there are two problems in order to get this faster. One is that because it's a free state-sponsored higher education, it has to be free for every child. It has to be equal to every child. Because of that, out of these 210 Unicodes, only around 10 Unicodes, which are in humanities and social sciences study programs, which comes on all island merit. Others are selected on a complex formula, 40, 55, 5. Now in order to apply this complex formula 40, 55, 5 into 200 Unicodes and give it the preference to the students, mind you, without not forgetting the recorrection marks as well, that these are the reasons why the delay to some extent, but it is definitely much better than before. But this time, just at the height of the issue, as we were about to release, everything was done so well, non-academics went on strike for 42 days. And that blocked the whole thing, and as a result we went 1 month back. So the UGC is, actually it's like a corporate sector. If you go to the UGC at 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock, still people are working. It is continuous work. But despite all that, because we have to be fair to everyone, this is a free system. And that is the reason why we can't do it much faster than that.
Right. Thank you very much.
Sonali, if I may interrupt,
Sure.
I want to pose a question to Professor Mohan De Silva about the UGC working around the clock. Let's take a look at the A-level examination for a minute here, Professor. We had the A-level examination in the month of August. You had the results out by the first week or second week of December. And then just a couple of days ago only, you see the Z score being released. It's like purposely trying to shy away the students who want to sit the second time or even the third time for the A-level examination. Is that fair?
Definitely not fair. I am with you. My heart is with you, but my brain is not with you. The reason is that I wish we can do it faster. The issue is, when the results are released on the 4th of December, within the first week of January we open the applications, and then we give 3 to 4 weeks for the applications to close, and after that we are talking about something like 80,000 applications, and some of them are first time, some of them are second time, some of them are third time, some of them are school applicants, some of them are private applicants. There are a lot of rules and regulations in the system to be fair to every child. So there are a lot of chance or room for error, and kids know this, and it is not easy for them not to try various methods in order to get the opportunity. If you register for a state higher education system once, you can go on sitting for the A-level exam, but you will not be considered. And about the well-known thing about the change in the district, and all this has to be checked. Our systems are linked to the examination department. Our systems are linked to the election department.
I understand all this.
So it's not easy.
Professor,
it is not as straightforward as that. If it's a private sector, no problem. We can just do it.
But Professor, is it fair at the end of the day on the part of the student? Let's say 3 days ago, a student knows that he or she is not eligible to sit or register to the university system in Sri Lanka. Can he or she study in the next 2 weeks, register in the next 2 weeks, and then sit for the exams again? Is that fair? Is that what the government requires the students to do?
It's definitely not fair. Ideally, it's like a long jump system where you try 3 times and you get the best results and you get the opportunity of entering. That would be the ideal, isn't it? However, if you try to do that, the whole system, because it has to be free for everyone, it gets totally complex. Because if a child comes in and he leaves, he loses the opportunity for another child to come into the free system, number one. Second, he will reduce the opportunity of a first timer to come into the system again. Because it has to be free for all, and it has to be equal to every child in every corner of this country.
The system itself
that
is the problem.
It is a problem in the system. It is not a problem of the individuals.
I think even if I can, UGC can work 24 hours a day, but I think the structure is where change the deck chairs.
Yeah.
Because the structure is, if you want to be free for all and fair for all, and efficiency on the other hand, equity and efficiency. I think the efficiency is going to suffer, and you really can't bring it up. That's why you really need a structural change.
Actually, Dr. Gamage, I'll come to you on this one. Professor De Silva also mentioned that you have this sort of system in place because it has to be free for all, and it has to be equal.
Equitable, yeah.
But it is not equal or equitable, is it? Because of the limited number of places and the number of students who are actually qualified or who are able to go to university but are unable because of limited resources, limited spots. So then, while we may talk about having free higher education, we are denying access to education to a lot of students, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a question of free education versus freedom to education. Universal free education is what is practiced in our country. There is no parallel development of a non-state higher education system because, as I mentioned before, this concept of free education has become, its mindset.
It's ingrained in the system. Yeah. Dr. Gamage, I want you mentioned the example of the United States and maybe not having students pay, and Australia as well, where they have Commonwealth supported places, and in the United States where students accumulate student debt. Now, this is a main talking point in the political arena over there, and at least on the left of the political divide, you see a growing movement, the Democratic Socialist movement, which is spurred on by the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, where they're calling for free college, for free higher education. Yes. So, while you may have probably correctly pinpointed the problem, is it pragmatic or realistic to believe that, let alone the next 2 years, that at least for the next 30 years, no government or no political leader, no matter how much of a strong man or how much of a freedom-loving liberal, will ever change the status quo as far as higher education is concerned.
But I think the students might end up voting with their feet. It's already happening. The market signals will work, and I think the government will have to respond. Now take the Green University in Hobangama. I mean, there's a lot of demand for that, and students are beginning to get the sense that time is money, and you are being a graduate if you're 28 or something, and being graduating when you're 24, there's a big difference. And I think that signal is going to get there, and the universities, state universities, are going to be more and more. Those who just can't do anything else might want to go there, and so I think the market signals will work, and the young people, I think, will start behaving differently.
Mr. Jasinger, you mentioned about how nowadays you get universities upon universities. It's not just the Ivy Leagues or the group of 8s from Australia or the top universities in the UK anymore. You have a lot of what our student unions and GMOA like to call degree shops, and this is a reality of education. Is a very lucrative business, and even in Sri Lanka, I mean, you go around Colombo and Greater Colombo, I'm sure there's one higher education institute for every square kilometre. They're very common, and you have a lot of I want to say substandard graduates coming out of these institutions as well. Do you feel that there is a lack of regulatory oversight and sort of setting of standards when it comes to these kinds of institutions?
Very much, very much. Because I would expect that there should be a minimum standard, and that minimum standard should be related or relevant to the needs of the country at the end of the day. Now, it would be very nice to have an MBA or a degree, a first degree, but then the jury is out there when you try to apply it. On the other hand, that question has been solved by the professional exams and the professional fees like accounting, marketing, and in some cases business studies. So the glamour for a degree still remains. So I think how the system works now in modern Sri Lanka is where you'll find an institution, a professional institute, will nurture a student through the professional side of education that would lead to a degree, and very usually it happens with an MBA. So
Professor De Silva, I'd like to come to you as the chairman of the UGC. Now, you also act as a regulator of sorts for higher education overall, not just in the state sector, also in the private sector. And if you look at the Sunday newspapers, it's very common to see advertising with UGC approved, UGC endorsed, etc. What sort of procedure does the UGC follow when giving approval for these private higher education institutions to function? And having granted such approval, what kind of monitoring and accountability mechanisms do you have in place to ensure that they're meeting a certain standard?
Well, I'm very happy that Ramal raised this question and you asked the question again. Actually, we are heading towards a major restructuring of this particular point. First, I'll answer your question. Up to 2012, the Chairman University Grants Commission was what is called the specified authority when someone wants to have a degree program in Sri Lanka. Honorable Minister of Higher Education was the degree awarding authority. In 2012, this responsibility was taken from University Grants Commission to the Ministry of Higher Education. From 2012 up to this date, it is the Secretary of Higher Education is the specified authority who takes the responsibility of checking all this, and then Honorable Minister of Higher Education is the degree awarding authority. But that is what is going on at the moment. However,
isn't that flawed?
It is. That's exactly the point. We saw it moment we came to the UGC. We worked on this very closely with the Ministry of Higher Education. I am happy to tell you that the last cabinet, Honorable Minister of Higher Education, put a bill to introduce an independent quality assurance and accreditation commission for Sri Lanka, independent of the University Grants Commission, independent of the Ministry of Higher Education, for state as well as non-state sector higher education. Now this bill is a huge document which UGC and the Ministry of Higher Education have been working on with the legal
But
draft.
Professor, this was a problem you said began in 2012 with...
well, even before it's a UGC.
Even before, but exacerbated in 2012 when it was taken away from the UGC and under the a little too much discretionary power for the Minister of Higher Education there.
I wouldn't say exacerbated. It's a system.
Okay, but the problem prevails. Now, we've had the good governance regime in place for 3 years. Why is this bill being delayed on such a pressing problem?
Well, creating an independent commission is a huge task. The bill
They set
itself,
up about 13 independent commissions in a few months.
Well, unfortunately, it's not like this. Because when you talk about developing an independent quality assurance and specifically the accreditation commission, it's a huge quantum of work. I know because I was fully involved in this bill. And believe it or not, Ministry of Higher Education and the University Grants Commission sat with the legal draft more than 16 times physically in order to develop this. And that is submitted to the Cabinet of Ministers last week, and the final document is with the AG, and that will be submitted, and then it will be placed in the Parliament, and it will be sent to all the stakeholders.
Until this bill is adopted, until it is put to Parliament in this thing, wouldn't it be wise, until that is done, for the time being at least, to restore that power back to the UGC until you can have that independent authority in place?
Well, I don't know. I don't. You know,
because the entire time that it is with the Ministry of Higher Education and with the Minister and the Secretary of the Ministry of Higher Education, don't you feel that you're giving this public official, the bureaucrat and the politician, a bit too much discretionary power when it comes to deciding who can award degrees in the country?
I don't think so, because basically whether it's the UGC Chairman or Secretary of Higher Education, both are bureaucrats. Both are appointed by the government.
Let me put it to you this way. Don't you think that when it is when the power is there, that the space for corruption is greater?
I don't think so, because basically if you look at the apex of the system of higher education as per 1978 University Act, the apex is the Honourable Minister of Higher Education. This is what the 1978 Act says. So the system is arranged from there onwards. So the individuals, eventually the degree awarding authority is the Honourable Minister of Higher Education. Whether it's a specified authority, is a UGC Chairman or a Secretary of Higher Education, doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the degree awarding authority at the moment, as per University Act of 1978, is vested with the Honourable Minister of Higher Education. So the fact that the Honourable Minister of Higher Education wants to change, it's a huge step forward, as I see.
Ramal, just before we go into a short commercial break, I want to talk about the degree programs offered by the university systems in Sri Lanka. Do you think that these degree programs are geared to take on the future as far as Sri Lanka is concerned? We're looking at the next level now.
All right, now according to the data that I have here, now this country wants to reach to the Vision 2025 to a digitized society. Right now you see only 5% of the total intake, Professor, get into IT. And I'm sure I haven't got the statistics, but if you take the aesthetics or the arts degrees, you might find those bloated over the science degrees. Now I'm not having any bias of what it is, but you asked the question, how useful is it? Take the situation that is happening right now and the problem we have faced in the private sector. The government has opened up jobs for graduates, unemployed graduates, so-called unemployed graduates. Now what we have seen is that the system is being hijacked by graduates already employed getting into the system. Now what I am saying is, we will go village by village, or we have a tie-up for job bank with the universities, and we recruit graduates, very promising graduates. And on the average, they probably would start at a range of about 20 to 25,000 a month salary. But what we have seen is the moment these schemes open up, these same employed graduates go into the government sector or government jobs for probably 5,000 a month. Now, we are all baffled in the system, in the private sector. Why would one want to sacrifice a promising career and remuneration to go into something like a quarter what they're getting? So the feedback that some of us got was, look, we are assured of a pension at the end of the day, and there is no proper performance evaluation in the state sector. I could be wrong, right? But these are the perceptions, these are the answers that we are getting. So I think what the government or the state has to employ unemployed graduates is one mission that the government wants to foster. But again, if the system is hijacked by those who are already employed in the private sector to get into that. And when I argued this at one forum, they said, look, you are denying them of their basic human rights, that they should have the right. But I'm sure if you start a system of some way where by definition it is unemployed graduates, then now what are we talking about? So in short, my take is that we are just fostering, we are just feeding a child and making the child fat and spoiled, rather than getting the child to work or improve himself.
Ramal, don't you think that a performance evaluation should be done on the 225 members in Parliament first before doing anything else?
Well, they are not private sector, unfortunately.
We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is education. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We start off the third round with Ramal Jalsingh, President of the National Chamber of Exporters. Now, Ramal, 1/3 of the members in Parliament, according to a new survey, 93 of them have not even qualified their ordinary level examination. And here we are tonight, talking about changing the Sri Lankan education system, the need to forge ahead, looking at things differently. All this has to start from the Parliament. Do we have any sort of promise from the Parliament itself as far as Sri Lanka's education sector is concerned? Or are we just dreaming?
You heard, I'm sure you heard it many, many times before, that the people deserve the leaders that they elect, right? So it goes back to that. Now we have a literacy rate of 97%, Professor? Something like that, right? 92%.
O-level pass rate in the population is less than 75%.
Right.
Pass rate is less than 25%.
So the people elect to Parliament, it is again, what is our politics driven by? It is driven by populism, right? The more that has been the case virtually from the time of independence. But having spoken to one of the ministers who was a lecturer of mine some time back, they seem to think that there's hope. And for him to lecture to me, he is a graduate and a postgraduate and all that. So, when you say hope, there's always hope of deliverance. Now we have the millennials who are coming up in society. And as Doctor said, that people would vote with their feet, changes would come about. And the market forces or social forces would change this, hopefully. But if you are going to vest everything, now I was a bit taken a bit surprised or taken aback when Professor said that the ultimate degree awarding authority is the Minister of Education. So my response would be to higher education. My response would be, okay, what are your qualifications, right? Now if you say that for some well, unfortunately, if that portfolio is held by one of the people whom we have categorized, and if that is the person who is going to really award the degree, ultimately by law, by statute, right, I think we'd be very, very unfortunate. So, moving forward, as in any effort, I feel that the private sector has to join hands with the UGC, with the Ministry of Education to bring about a change. Now we have heard that the private sector is the engine of growth and the driver of growth. And I think that last week we released the National Export Strategy, which again I think was a very good exercise in public-private partnership. At least we got a plan together. Now the execution is a different thing. That is something where without the private sector participation it cannot happen. Vision 2025 speaks of a new Sri Lanka, an enterprise Sri Lanka, digitalized Sri Lanka, and bringing in more inclusion expanding the female participation in the economy. So to do all that, from what I read here, if the government tries to do it alone, whichever government, it will fail. So you need the buy-in and the systems and the mechanisms to bring the private sector in. So to answer your question, if you depend, or if looking from a bird's eye view, if you see what's at Parliament and what you expect the country to become, woe be unto us.
Thank you very much, Ramal Jasinghe, President of the National Chamber of Exporters. I now move my attention to Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the University Grants Commission in the country. Professor, there is an issue with CITEM. Undergraduates protest opposite the University Grants Commission. Unemployment, undergraduates protest opposite the University Grants Commission. There's something wrong at a university, at a hostel, undergraduates protest in front of the University Grants Commission. Why is it that the University Grants Commission is always on the wrong end of the stick every single time something goes wrong with Sri Lanka's education system? And you are responsible, are you not?
I think it's a very clear answer to that. Very easy answer is a location. If the University Grants Commission was located well away from the heart of Colombo, in a very busy terrain, not in close to the National Hospital of Sri Lanka, blocking all the casualties and the heart attack patients coming for stenting, I don't think we're going to get that number of students coming and blocking our road, because if they can't block anything else. So superficial answer is the location, but the deep answer is the system. University Grants Commission has a particular role. The universities are autonomous. Universities are controlled by the vice chancellors and the councils of the universities. UGC appoints the councils, and it's the council and the university vice chancellor runs the university. And if you look at the 1978 Act, they have vested a lot of powers. And 99.9% of the questions they bring to the UGC and break our gate are the questions which has to be directed to the university councils and to the vice chancellors. So they don't actually come to the University Grants Commission expecting an instant solution. You're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6 buses, spending lakhs on lakhs of rupees, coming from faraway places to UGC and breaking the gate. It is not to solve the problem. It's much more deep-rooted within a political, socio-economic, various other things are there in it. Therefore, now the Honorable Minister of Higher Education has directed very clearly. We have called the councils. Now we have finished 3 councils altogether, and stimulating them, highlighting their powers vested in them by the 1978 University Act with the vice chancellors, and working very closely with the vice chancellors and stimulating them to make those decisions at the level of the university rather than giving this opportunity for students. However, when you look at the details of what these students come for, actually most of them are very trivial. And in fact today, I must tell you that we had a news conference in the University Grants Commission auditorium. All the news media channels, including your channel, was there. And we, myself, Honorable Minister of Higher Education, led the thing with the Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya, Rector of the Trincomalee campus, and the competent authority of Southeastern University, Sri Lanka. 3 hotspots at the moment. We address every question the government is put to tell them what is the actual truth and what is given in the newspapers and various other things.
Professor, I think in the answer that Ramal gave to the question that I posed in 3rd round, he says that in the event someone acts as the Minister of Higher Education at the topmost body to grant admission, it's going to be all grant degree programs. It's going to be a problem. We saw a very strong man of the previous regime, and now crossed over, and now in the joint opposition. I don't want to mention names, but he was also behind bars for contempt of court, was holding the post of Minister of Higher Education at present. I'm not saying that he's uneducated or so on, so on and so forth. I'm trying to just say that this is an individual who was behind bars for contempt of court as well. And if you have someone like that as the Minister of Higher Education, that itself is a problem, isn't it?
As a responsible government officer, what I can tell you is that that system is going to change forever. And I'm very happy to see that happening during our time.
When will that happen?
Well, it is approved by the cabinet. The document will be submitted to the parliament soon. And then it will go to all the stakeholders, including all the professional organizations, the engineers, quantity surveyors, doctors, everyone. And there will be a public discussion on it. And then the commission will be established. In fact, the money has been already allocated in the last budget as well for the commission, and hopefully that will see the dawn of a new era in the quality assurance and accreditation of higher education in our country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. I want to move to Dr. Jawaharlal, but before that, very quickly, Professor, you also, but the University Grants Commission was very vocal on CITEM as well. Now, you being a doctor, a surgeon at the Colombo South Teaching Hospital, how do you view this matter as a whole?
Well, University Grants Commission is responsible for state higher education. We are not responsible for non-state higher education as per University Act 1978. Whatever the University Grants Commission performed is at the request of the government of Sri Lanka. And when the government of Sri Lanka wants us to do something, as a regulatory body, we are legally obliged to carry on with that responsibility. So basically, that's what was the relationship between the University Grants Commission and this particular issue. When the questions are asked from us, unfortunately, University Grants Commission is conceived as a place where everything can be solved. But we are bounded by the 1978 Act. So when the Honourable Minister, His Excellency the President, the Cabinet of the Honourable Prime Minister, the Cabinet of Ministers request us to do certain things to solve a national problem, we contribute. And it's my personal opinion doesn't matter there, and as a public officer of responsibility, it doesn't really matter in a forum like this. What I do is what I am mandated to do by the government of Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohandi Silva. Yeah.
In my lectures all the time, right? There was a time I did lecture to public officials at the SLEDA. So I think this all goes back to the 1972 Constitution, Professor. Correct me if I'm wrong, where the power shifted from the civil service to the executive, and therefore you are in this situation. So this is something that had been done so many years back with the constitutional change. I suppose you need a revolution, not a change.
I think 1978 University Act at the time when it was submitted, it was Professor Stanley Kalpage who did it. At the time, Professor Stanley Kalpage was the chairman of the University Grants Commission and the Secretary of Higher Education. And Sri Lankan higher education system was much smaller than what you see here. At the moment, we have under UGC 15 big universities and 18 higher educational institutes, and there are 5 other universities established under separate act, KDU being one of them. 2 big universities, KDU, SIAT, and also Ocean University of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is a fairly big state-sponsored higher education system, and except those 4, the University Grants Commission has a responsibility of managing 15 big universities. So it's different from 2070s. There is a time.
Thank you very much, Professor. I need to move to Dr. Jawaharlal Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia. Dr. Gamage, in 2011, there was a huge transformation in Sri Lanka's university system. We saw the introduction of the Leadership and Positive Attitude Development Program introduced by the previous regime, and this was held across 28 military camps in Sri Lanka. This, however, was revoked in the year 2015. However, just this year we saw on the 20th of February this year, a principal also died following the leadership training program that was held in the country, a principal from the Hambantota district, and the 26th of February 2018 this was revoked as well. Isn't politics and education in Sri Lanka has always been entangled, and the brunt of it has to be paid by the undergraduates or even the students per se? Don't you agree?
Well, I mean, politics and education has to be entangled, because when education is provided 100% by the government, then the government has to be accountable. And so I don't think you can talk about taking politics away from education is not realistic. That's one. And as for that leadership program, and actually I think it was a good program. I really had a chance to look at the evaluations of that program. And it is unfortunate that it was stopped, and I hope the UGC will actually do something.
There were three students who died as a result of this training program. In the year 2011, in the year 2013, and then we saw the death of the principal as well in 2018.
No, I don't think anybody died in the leadership training programs. That's not correct, is that? Yeah.
The information that we have says that three individuals died, 2 students and 1 principal. That was in the year 2018.
Oh, that's a principal training program. That's, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, yes, but you have to look at the, I mean, these things happen. And of course you have to improve these programs, but I think these leadership programs, it's a pity that we don't have anything like that for the students anymore.
So where are we really heading as a country now? Because we see that 2015 the government comes into play, revokes the system, and in 2018 because of this mishap that took place with the principal, this was revoked. What is the way forward?
I think the way forward would be, as Professor Vance was saying, one is independent commission for higher education. Actually, it should be, and one really good way would be to have one Minister of Education. I mean, if you take most countries, you have Minister of Education, and you can have a Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission, and then University Class Commission, and National Education Commission for schools. One thing is, we really need to, in this country, the media has a particular role to play, because we really talk about what gets, who makes most noise. Who makes most noise? Most noise is made by 6% of a age cohort. Every year, 350,000 or so enter year 1. And we really need to follow the age cohort. And only 6% of that age cohort is making the noise. The rest is silent. The rest of the 94% is silent. The media, you really have to speak for the rest of the 94%. Media also go after who makes most noise. And you are looking at only 6% of our youth. If you take 18 to 24-year-olds, only 6%, I think, I'm getting the UGC statistics, only 6% is going to go to public universities. What about the other 94%? That's a silent majority. And I think media has a responsibility to bring attention to this silent majority.
Dr. Gamage, you speak about having a minister who's in charge of education as a whole. But isn't it imperative for us to have a permanent secretary in Sri Lanka who handles education despite change of governments?
That's why we have the commissions, actually. It's a secretariat. And as Professor Mohan was saying, actually when you say the Ministry is a degree awarding authority, I think in practice we have a process for degree awarding. There's a process for awarding degrees, and actually minister has to make the decisions based on that. I mean, it's not as bad as it sounds. Yeah. It's like the minister gives authority. There is a process, and the minister actually has the authority to intervene. And I don't think they have intervened in that many cases, because there's a certain process to go through to get degree awarding. So I don't think from 76 to today, I don't think the ministers have, to my knowledge, have intervened. Irregular, maybe CITA was in one case, I don't know. But usually, the minister has to go through the papers, and when the papers reach his desk, he can't do much about it. So it's really, I mean, I don't think we are going to get a drastic change by having an independent commission, because the practice has been that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Jawaharlal Gamage. I open the floor for questions from 2 journalists, Sonali Vanikbadwe and Nadim Majid. Let's start off with Sonali.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gamage, my question is to you initially. I'd like to take the concept of education as a whole first. Initially we start off with there being very little attention paid to preschool education, and then there's a lack of comprehensive sexuality education across schools in the island. Then there is no little or no teacher training adequately. English teaching in rural schools is abysmal. There's no critical learning being encouraged. As a result, there's stereotypical textbook parroting. There's very little innovation, no holistic learning. So our children, the majority of our children end up being not world ready. And then you juxtapose it with the situation where there is so much stigmatization if you don't make it to university. So how hopeless is the situation, and how do we extricate ourselves from it?
I think one way is to really think of, just step back from the system. To me, one way is really openness. Now if somebody asked me what would be the thing, if you were asked for one thing that you could do to fix the school system, I would say an open database of teachers.
Right.
If we know each school in the country, how many in the cadre and how many teachers are, who are the teachers. We don't have to know the name of the teacher, it could be just ID, but what the qualification of the teacher, how long the teacher has been there. That simple database, if it's open, I think that's going to actually make a big, huge change. Openness. Now, Professor Mohan was talking about, coming up with a new system where you regulate, but I really have a lot of doubt about that. Because as you were saying, Judicial Grants Commission is another government department in a way. And we know how government department works. Again, even there, I'm saying openness. Make it a requirement that they put certain information out there in the open, in the web. And that is the best way, openness is the best way to check for quality. Because in our, I don't think our bureaucracy is set for proper regulation. So to plan for a regulation of all the higher education institutions, private, public, non-government, I think it's a huge task, and I don't think our bureaucracy is up to it. So again, school education or higher education, I think we really need to think of new technology, new ways of open government is really, I think, one big way we can really tackle this problem.
Doctor, how hard can it be to implement comprehensive sexuality education in schools? This is causing a lot of the social issues that we face.
Because I think who's going to teach it? I know in St. Thomas's College they had a really nice program, Sound Mind, Sound Body. And they did a survey, I should not have missed it, but found that actually even in primary school, the attitudes of boys is so really worrisome about women, about the opposite sex. So they started this really Sound Body, Sound Mind program, and it's really never took off. I think the problem is the teachers themselves are not ready to teach that.
Sure. So which is why we have teacher training institutes, which is why we have a ministry. Right. So I think, again, the standard ways of doing it will not work. You say, okay, the way to do is then train the teachers, then who's training the teachers. So I think it has to, again, come from outside. Right now, actually, I don't have an answer to that. Because we have really, I think there's a really good textbook, resource book that was developed, but the teachers won't touch it because the teachers themselves are so, their attitudes towards sexuality is such that, this is like totally great to them. Thank you very much.
So I think it's a difficult task.
Professor, when it comes to university education in Sri Lanka, we are told that it is the cream of the crop that make it to universities. But what we see on the streets is a bunch of venomous young adults, often driven by politics, often driven by unreasonable demands, at times reasonable, who take drastic measures to get to their ends. Where has Sri Lanka's education system gone wrong? When you are given free education and you act, in such a manner that it is quite similar to hooliganism, who do you hold responsible? where is the education system in Sri Lanka going wrong in terms of the fact that are we not teaching our children the soft skills? Are we not teaching our children how to meditate? Where are we going wrong, and how do we correct it?
The core answer to your question is the free education itself. That's the core answer to your question. If you look at the students, unruly students in streets, I have to tell you that very large majority of Sri Lankan university students are very decent. Very large majority. I would say about 95%. But they are a large, silent, hard-working majority. Unfortunately, the large, hard-working, intelligent students are controlled by a minority of very noisy, very venomous, very vociferous students who have been working for their own agendas. Large, silent majority and a small, very vocal minority.
So the large silent majority have a herd mentality. Is that what you're saying?
Not really. There is not herd mentality. It is because universities at the moment, they don't have a safe and conducive environment to study. During last 2.5 years, University Grants Commission established a separate center called the Center for Gender Equity and Equality, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence and Ragging. There is a senior professor who is in charge of that, Professor Uma Kumaraswamy. We have a 24-hour hotline, 123-700. If you ring that number, there is someone in the UGC 24 hours, even at 2 o'clock in the morning, to answer, and all this goes to the center, and the next day the Vice Chancellor and everyone will be informed. Last week or week before last, we introduced an app which is piloted in Uvavelasa University, where if you have an Android phone, student can activate and tell us where, when, how it is done. So there is a lot of proactive steps UGC has done to create that safe and conducive environment. However, the ragging is a subculture in the university, and because of that, there is a huge resistance within the university by this minority to control the majority, and unfortunately this majority is at the receiving end. This majority does not come from best of schools in Sri Lanka. They come from very remote, especially girls, rural folk, and they are all in the hostels. During last 2 years, we have built 83 hostels. Virtually 80% of the students are given hostel facility. But despite all that, those hostels are used by students from the peripheral areas. Those students are prey to this minority of group of students. Unfortunately, it is politicalized. It is sadly very badly politicalized. And what you see on the road is the outcome. These students who come to the roads are very innocent. They are being taken, maybe herd mentality because that's been created, otherwise they get assaulted in the hostel. Unfortunately, it is as bad as that. And that is why we are trying as much as possible proactive steps under the leadership of the present Honorable Minister of Higher Education to go head on and try to get rid of this menace to create this safe and conducive environment.
Professor, on this very show last year we had a conversation dedicated to university ragging and the steps to be taken against it, and one of our guests on the show very controversially said that perhaps if this situation can't be controlled, perhaps we need to bring in the military. So just some different thoughts to that. Mr. Ramal Jasingha, the general perception of state institutions in Sri Lanka is one of lethargy. As you mentioned, there's no proper system of evaluation in the state sector, and if you juxtapose that with the private sector, it is one of vibrancy, it's attractive, fast pace. So there's an absolute disconnect between the two. My question to you is, going forward, how do you see this situation being rectified? How do you see this disconnect being bridged, in addition to this private-public partnership that you mentioned?
All right, you started the question by saying a perception.
Sure.
Now, having dealt with some state organizations, I must say there's change happening. It's not this usual lethargy or hegemony or whatever that you perceive. As Professor said, there is a majority there who are very dedicated, who want to make a change. And also today, if you saw what went viral with regard to parking parking meters, when somebody went to pay the parking meter, and there was an issue, there are CCTVs around. So I think for somebody to be lethargic in the state sector, wherever that, I think it was Colombo Municipal Council, right? It would be a little more harder for that person to be what he was a generation ago, or 2 generations ago. So there is commitment, and it is up to the public first to appreciate that. Now I can tell you firsthand, I have not had any issue with any dealings I've had with the public sector. One was my identity card. I need to because I had changed so much.
Mr. Jasingh, but you get your work done in the capacity of a head of a corporate. But we're talking about the common man, we're talking about the masses.
Or there could be this, I dressed up like this, I went to collect my ID card, so probably they felt that I was different, right? So I can't speak for the rest of them, but when it came to collecting the card, I had to stay with the rest of them. And I took my turn. But what happened there were 2 gentlemen who came in uniform. I won't say which force, but they cut the line, and they were given the privileges. So that probably must be out of, and they were not military, right? So those things happen. But by and large, what I've seen over the last 3 to 4 years, there is efficiencies that has come into the system, and there is an attempt to imitate the private sector.
So you're hopeful?
I am very hopeful. And having lectured with the SLEDA and with the universities, now taking off what the professor and doctor said a while ago, I started my lecturing career at Chadanapura, and I used to lecture the final years in the business and marketing stream. So I asked him the question you asked. I said, come on, why are you striking? Right? What is all this? So as they said, it was peer pressure for one thing. And the question that I was upset about is, I said, put your hands up, all those who would want to leave the country and find greener pastures. To my dismay, it was 100% of the class.
Sure.
So I said, look, you have a BSc in marketing here, and you are going. What is the sort of job you'll expect to get there? Probably you get a menial job in the West till you prove yourself. Now, some seem to think that are better than contributing here. So then I asked the question the other way around. Why don't you do the same menial job and start here? And with the same commitment, you could change the country. But for some reason, they are not willing to do that because they see something greener, something different. And I had an interaction with a graduate for quite some time who migrated with her family. And life is not easy. But they find that is a more preferred situation than going through here. Now, by the time she migrated, she was in senior management. So I can't understand you find the grass is greener next door, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Dr. Gamage, I want to come to you. The way that people learn is changing. I'm sure you're aware of individuals in your organization who are able to get degrees from top global universities online. Through certificate courses, various Harvard has Harvard X, and etc., etc. In this sort of climate, you have apps where you can get a course in graphic design or in even some postgraduate medicine courses from some of the best medical schools in the world online. In this sort of climate, do you think that our state education sector runs the risk in the next decade of becoming irrelevant, given that there is already only 6% that is making use of free state education, and the other 94% is getting their education from the private sector? Do you feel that our state education sector runs the risk of becoming irrelevant?
I think it already is in some ways. If you take the arts faculty, now we have 50% enrollment in arts and social science, and in some faculties 90% are women. I mean, you take it as an indicator, and 85% at least. The rest of the 15%, most are, there are a lot of praise there. Right? You know, at least you go to the university and you find a partner. You know, these women don't get that opportunity either. So actually, why do most women go to these faculties, go to the state sector arts faculties? Because the men have voted with their feet. They're not going there anymore. So there's always going to be, because it's absolutely free, there's always going to be enrollment, but it's going to be by the marginalized.
Professor De Silva, in this sort of climate, this growing culture of online learning, is there a plan, or is there thinking within the UGC or the Ministry of Higher Education or at the policy making level about the possibility of potentially putting Sri Lankan universities also into this online climate?
Well, actually, because what you perceive, what is happening in the state university system is what you see on the road. But actually within university there is a lot of activity, lot of progress in the quality of degree programs are going on, including the online component. If you look at UCSC, there is significant online component in most of it. If you look at Moratua, if you look at Sri Jawaharlal, most of the things are online as well. So there is a lot of activity, but you don't see it in the big picture, because what you see is the bad things, you know. So I just want to clarify something what Sujata said about the independent quality assurance and accreditation. Independent quality assurance and accreditation is not a structural commission. It is just a structure. That is not the important part. It is a function, and it's a huge process. UGC has a separate quality assurance directorate, and last year we did 42 humanities and social science degree programs assessed by what is called the program reviews. We have 145 attributes, and in order to get the excellence, you have to have more than 80% out of that 145 attributes. It's a very transparent process. So when you talk about the independent quality assurance and accreditation, you're talking about a huge process. It's not just a commission doing, you know.
Understood, Professor.
So it's different, yeah.
Talk about that process. It's a, you know, it's a very internal process. It's the same group of people assessing themselves. Okay. So I think there's a problem with that.
A greater sense of transparency and accountability.
They go and assess each other. So yeah. I think again openness, and universities, they have to be compared with the rest of the other private, semi-private, non-governmental institutions. By having a separate state sector, I think is a problem. I think all universities should be subjected to this.
On that note, Professor De Silva, we don't have much time, so I'd like your answer in as little time as possible. Now, we know that Sri Lankan state universities, in terms of global rankings, we're not really up there with the best. We're quite closer to the middle to lower rungs of the ladder. While we focus a lot on undergraduates and undergraduate study, a major component of how universities get their rankings is their research work.
Yes.
Their research and development. What is the current state of research and development in Sri Lankan state universities, and why haven't we seen sort of great improvement? Now, we know that, for example, we hear stories about technological advancements or advancements that come out of universities. There's an Australian university that's looking at ways to cure dengue. There's the technology in genetics advancements that are being made with systems like CRISPR. Why don't we ever hear of that kind of advancement coming out of a Sri Lankan state university? What is lacking here? Is it just a lack of funding and resources?
Well, when you talk about ranking, there are different ranking systems in the world. We were in Germany a couple of weeks ago studying a suitable ranking system for a country like Sri Lanka, which is a developing country. What you perceived by the ranking system is the global ranking system.
I'll rephrase the question. Is R&D in Sri Lankan state universities adequate?
I don't think so. I think R&D is inadequate, because the funding for R&D comes from the state as well as from the non-state. And we have done a study with the World Bank last year, and that data shows that actually the companies themselves, their stimulus to stimulate the university system for R&D activities is also poor. Because we don't have big companies as well. I think it is something which both parties, state as well as non-state, can help in order to achieve that.
Ramal, you act as a lecturer at many universities in Sri Lanka, including one of the prestigious PIM university in the country. My question to you is very simple. How do you increase the level of competence in knowledge, skills, abilities, and even attitudes of students these days? It's a tough task. It's not an easy task. How do you increase, and what is the role of the private sector in this venture?
The private sector role is very, very vital in this, and the private sector has opened schemes or the gate for training and nurturing graduates. Some of them have worked. Now, for instance, if you take some of the multinationals like Tobacco Company or Lever Brothers, still to this day they take the best, or they attempt to take the best of graduates, first or second uppers, and they put, so the terms are very attractive, so a lot of them stay in the system, but then again it would be not many of them. Taking my role as a lecturer, what I try to impart there is the professionalism of how the professional world works, and a lot of the curriculum is professional, it's not academic, and that's why the universities have opened for people like us to come and lecture. Now, I think way back when I left school some time ago, we had an institution called the Institute of Chemistry, Professor, which was a very bold attempt by a few university dons in the Colombo University, and that was led, and today it's called the College of Chemical Sciences. I was one of the first people who actually I got in there for the sake of nothing to do, right? So the entry level was not that harsh, so I got in to this, and it developed my career, and I was one of the first people to get a job because I was doing this course.
I want to drag your attention to the system in Australia, Canada, so on and so forth. The systems adopted in the developed world, Ramal. In fact, I was talking about this this morning as well. When you take a look at Australia, for an example, just because there are change of governments, policies don't change, policies remain. But in a country like Sri Lanka, where there's a literacy rate of 92%, we see change of policies overnight. We see cabinet reshuffles happening like a pack of cards. But the jokers still remain in this pack as well, unfortunately.
So the same pack of cards, the same deck.
Absolutely. but what's happening right now is quite alarming. What are we looking at in the future? Sri Lanka, in the next few years, where will it stand in this equation of education?
Well, I don't mean to sound ironic here, but here I have a document which says where Sri Lanka plans to stand. So looking at the document itself, it seems sound, but again you don't have I don't think, right, or we need to work very fast towards the infrastructure to enable this.
Mr. Jalsingha, Professor De Silva said there was a lack of stimulus coming from the private sector to sort of fuel R&D in state universities. What do you have to say about that?
It's very true, right? Because the private sector right now is struggling to survive, and there is no appetite for
R&D. But don't you think the private sector too could benefit greatly from stimulating R&D?
Most definitely, particularly in the line of exports. Now, if you take, I think at this forum a couple of weeks or months ago, as I argued, the rising or the depreciating rupee has no direct advantage to the exporter, because it's up to about, in some cases, even 95% of inputs are imported. All we do is a value addition and send it. Now, where we can really benefit on the depreciating rupees if we do our import subsidy in the sense of research and development. I mean, you better use your silica, rather than exporting the silica, you better use your raw materials. So for that we need very active, proactive research and development.
Dr. Gamage, this is something really tragic that we come across in our interactions with young adults. The fact that they have no sense of ownership of the country. Nobody wants to stay back and fix it. So the thinking is, man degree ki vara karla raten yana. So how is the government supposed to control this brain drain, which is a huge issue we're facing? We educate these amazing individuals who all go to other countries and serve other countries while we're stuck with the mediocrity. And in your answer, can you also tie in the policymakers, because they need to be held accountable at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think the brain drain, I don't see that a big problem. I think a lot of people come back, and I think it's good for people to go out. So I think a lot of people, there are a lot of people, there's reasons, family, various reasons, and people come back. So I don't see, if people want to go, I mean, let them go. I mean, it's our responsibility to make it attractive for them to, you know, stay here. And I think why young people, whether they should feel obliged to serve their country, I don't think so. I mean, they should, you know, they should look out for themselves, and it's for us to encourage them. As for, no, I don't think there's nothing.
Mr. Jaisingh, do you have any opposing views? Why is Sri Lanka failing to retain its talent?
I think in my answer you just whispered saying quality of life, but actually, I beg to differ. Half my family is abroad, but I mean I would never migrate, right? Because I'm having a good time here, right? And I'm enjoying a good quality of life. But
when you say good time, I'm trying to figure out what this time is that you're talking about.
I'm not
very quickly, I'll give you 20 seconds to wrap up,
President of the National Chamber of Exporters, and the quality of life enjoyed by the average Sri Lankan is very different.
Well, that's not
20 seconds.
It's an honorary post. I not paid for that.
Yeah. I'll give you 20 seconds to respond to Sonali's question.
I'm sorry, yes. Yeah. You said that to retain people,
yes.
It is opportunity, right? And that opportunity, I don't think it's fair to put it on the state. It is where the private sector has to expand. Now, I can tell you from a standpoint of exporters, if we do not do value addition and innovation and research and development, as an export market or remaining in the commodities market, we will not survive. Because just a while ago I was explaining, today Starbucks is investing heavily on research and development to diversify and to innovate in the coffee plantations, because the yield of coffee has dropped due to climate change. Now Starbucks and Brazil and the coffee plantation is part of a value chain. Now here in Sri Lanka, anything can happen to tea. I don't know to what extent we have, I think, I mean, you will be able to talk about tea better than I, but we are not doing initiatives, or the private sector not involved in initiatives to see what can go wrong in tea. We have a traditional market practice, but we are not doing anything for the future, futuristic. Now if we have such futuristic programs, you will retain the young talent.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple answer, it's an economy stupid argument. You know, if the economy is vibrant, people will come back.
Thank you very much, gentlemen and the lady, for your thoughts in the first, second and third and fourth rounds. The only thought that I can think of is give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So what is the government trying to do? We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I start off the final round with Ramal Jaisingh, President of the National Chamber of Exporters. Ramal is also representing the private sector tonight on our show. Ramal, we're talking about top-class universities. We are talking about Oxford, we're talking about Stanford, we're talking about Cambridge, we're talking about Harvard, we're talking about top universities in the world. Why can't we build a homegrown top university in Sri Lanka? What's lacking?
Actually, that's something I wanted to comment on. I think our university system is as old as India, or probably we all started at the same time. Okay, India has a legacy of intellectual study. We have a equally long legacy, or maybe a longer legacy. And I think at least 2 universities started as Pirivanas, right? Kalaniya and Jadanapura. So we have a long history. Now we have to be proactive. Now if you take say Stanford, the story goes that the founder of Stanford actually went to Harvard and was denied entry, and was denied, and they refused to take his money, and then he formed Stanford. Now what is the chance for us having some sort of a pioneering effort? Then why go across the world? I mean, you just go across to India. You find the Institute of IIMs, right? The Indian Institutes of Management and the IITs that are world class. Now, I was fortunate enough to spend some time on, at IIM Ahmedabad. Now, that university is, or that institute is so highly recognized that they have tie-ups with Harvard. So, what it actually translated, if you did the degree course there, you had preference at Harvard. So, you had those synergies and connections. And IIM is probably younger than our Colombo University, or maybe even Peradeniya. But they made leaps and bounds. Then I'm not sure what the name of the university is, but there is a university in India where the standards of entry are far higher than Harvard or Stanford. And there is a lot of competition among Indians and among foreign students to get into that. Now, India was a closed economy till the 1990s, and everything was well regulated. But I can tell you something about Indian policy making, at least from what I learned in the classroom at Ahmedabad. One of the curricular sections covered the economic policy of Jawaharlal Nehru, which was a thick book. Now it is totally irrelevant today, but it had a roadmap for India, where through a closed and socialist economy it went into an open market economy. But at least the roadmap was shown. So however turbulent their politics was, there are certain things that they didn't touch, or that they opened, or that they probably regulated, but there was a national agenda there, and a very patriotic agenda. So I think it goes back to us being patriotic, proactive, and taking Sri Lanka onto the world map in terms of tertiary education.
Thank you very much, Ramal Jasinger, President of the National Chamber of Exporters. I now move my attention to Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia. Dr. Gamage, 2 years from now, what lessons will we have learned as far as the Sri Lankan education system is concerned? We see a change of government in the year 2015, 8th of January. We wanted change. Will we have seen change after the 5-year term of this government ends or comes to a close?
I think 2 years from now, I don't think there's point in talking about it. But let's think about what we have learned now. And I think, talking about the first thing is world-class university. I think it's really, we even should not be talking about it. We should be talking about things like time to graduate, some simple measures, and let's get some decent universities. So let's talk about decent universities before we talk about world-class university. But for one, we don't have the market tools. For the India here, they have the market, the size of the market here. So let's talk about, first thing is let's get realistic and talk about decent universities. And at least for that, we don't have to be worrying about government. Actually, the University Grants Commission can do some things. For example, let's have some measures of performance measures for the university, not very big measures. Take the second, when you take, how many people go on to the second year? Do you know how many people actually don't show up for classes in the first year itself? There's intake, we say about 22,000, but by the end of the second year, first year, how many are in the university? So those simple measures, let's start with those. Those are called process measures. Let's get our processes right. Let's get how old are the students when they get into the university? What is the time to graduate? These are very basic performance measures. So let's start with very basic performance measures for the universities, and we don't have to wait for the government to do that. Our agencies can do that, and I think University Grants Commission can play a major role there. So let's not talk about world-class universities, let's talk about decent universities. Universities where actually people have a reasonable chance that they are safe there, that they can graduate on time, and then let's talk about, maybe in 5 years we can talk about world-class universities. So I think we know enough, and we can do enough without complaining about government. There are simple things we can do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sujatha Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia, and former Director General, Tertiary and Vocational Commission of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the University Grants Commission of the country. Professor, in a few weeks' time, in exactly 1.5 weeks, There will be 321,000 students in Sri Lanka who will be sitting for the advanced level examination, out of which 100,000 or less will be qualified to enter the university system in Sri Lanka. However, only 25,000 to 30,000 will get access to universities in the country. What is the message you have for that 70,000 individuals who will not get access to the Sri Lankan education system and who does not have the means to fund their future?
Well, I don't think I have the answer to that as the chairman of the University Grants Commission. I wish I have the answer, because the answer has to come from the government of Sri Lanka. That's my clear answer to your question. But I just want to touch two things of what Ramal said and what Sujata said. IIT is a world-class institute, but it's a non-state. Non-state. That's the difference between Sri Lanka and Colombo University and IIT. We cannot go to that level because our system is free. Our selection criteria is not university-centered. It is a free system. That is one of the big problems. So you can't compare. And the second thing, what Sujata said, how many days and months and hours we are losing as a result of all this. We are doing that data now. Probably within the next few weeks, Honorable Minister of Higher Education is going to advertise to the whole country how much hours we are losing as a result of all these strikes and etc. I think the country must know. But I think I need to tell you one thing. It is very easy to develop a new degree program. It is a Herculean task to change or restructure existing degree program. 52% of our graduates, the entrance, are either to the humanities and social science and the management. 32.2% of the graduates enter the Sri Lankan university system for humanities and social sciences. Changing the existing system of humanities and social sciences is a real challenge, and we've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. I think we are going ahead. Internship programs are coming up, and also the new like IT, basic English, basic mathematics and basic statistics are coming up into the humanities and social sciences. So we will be seeing some good outcome. In fact, last week Honorable Minister called all the deans of the humanities and social sciences for a half-a-day discussion on the same subject. So it is not as bad as what we think, and we are trying our level best.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the University Grants Commission of the country. Thank you very much, Dr. Sujata Gamage, Senior Research Fellow, Learn Asia, and former Director General, Tertiary and Vocational Commission of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Professor Mohan De Silva, Chairman of the UGC, and also Ramal Jasingha, President of the National Chamber of Exporters of Ceylon, for joining us this evening on the show. Thank you very much, Nadeem, and Attorney at Law, Sonali Wangabadige, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. Do it right, do it wisely, then you will see growth, and that is the future. Take care and good night.